Well, good afternoon and welcome to all of the members of the Kentucky Commission on Women who are with us today by Zoom, and to anyone else who might be watching this live or archived on YouTube. My name is Heather Deering, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor Coleman and Acting Director of the Kentucky Commission on Women. I'm so pleased to be here today for this installment of our Virtual Conversations with Commissioners series. The Kentucky Commission on Women was established in 1968 by Governor Louis Nunn by executive order, and then became an official state agency in 1970 through legislative action. After a period of dormancy, the commission was reactivated by Governor Beshear when he charged Lieutenant Governor Coleman with revitalizing it. Over the past few years, we've reestablished ourselves as the state agency whose mission is to strengthen, empower, and elevate women and girls in Kentucky. Our commissioners are an incredible and diverse group of women from all corners of the Commonwealth. Many of them are with us today on this Zoom. We have Susan Hirschberg, Emma Hutchins, Fran Carrico, Marita Willis, Christy Guffey, and Kathleen Wright. Thank you all for joining us today. And we have other commissioners who are watching the live stream. So we are going to give as much time as we can to this amazing panelists that we have with us. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Conversations with Commissioners series. So we started this live stream series so we could share conversations between commissioners and guests about a topic or theme that we feel is important to women about the Commonwealth. And it was our intent to share these important conversations with anyone who wanted to watch them. We invite special guests who are knowledgeable or experts in an area to present information, and when there's time, to open it up for questions from our commissioners. Our theme, our guests, and our commissioner hosts change each conversation. This is our 7th conversation in the series, and our previous topics have been about women in the workforce, Juneteenth, women's representation in government, women's health, and domestic violence. Today's topic is a bit of a diversion for us, but I think it's going to be one of the most exciting ones. And before I hand it over to our esteemed host of today's conversation, I would like to make a quick note that the views expressed in today's presentation or in any material shared today are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the Kentucky Commission on Women or the administration, and their presence doesn't constitute or imply endorsement on their views. With that, I would like to hand it over to our host today, Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman.
Thank you so much, Heather, and welcome everybody. I am so excited about this conversation. We are in the presence of true pioneers today, and I'm only going to say a few things before we get right to it. But as most everybody knows, bourbon and Kentucky go hand in hand. Although bourbon might not be our state's #1 export, it is certainly our signature industry. Economic numbers from the end of last year from the Kentucky Distillers Association show bourbon continues to be the heartbeat of the Commonwealth, generating about $360 million in state and local taxes last year and employing more than 23,000 Kentuckians. And bourbonism. While you might be hearing a lot of headwinds and uncertainty for the bourbon industry due to tariffs, we are going to hear more today about the tourism component of bourbon and how it's remained resilient and continues to be a major draw for visitors to Kentucky, because bourbon isn't just an export, it is an experience. So while you might think the bourbon industry is male dominated, it's also women driven. Women are crucial to every phase of the bourbon industry, from making, marketing, to selling, and everything in between. And women now make up nearly 40% of the U.S. whiskey consumer base, a significant increase from just 15% in the early 1990s. This demographic shift has been a key factor in the overall growth of whiskey sales. So today, to tell us a little bit more about bourbon, past, present, and future, we have 3 of the most amazing women in the industry. Peggy No Stevens, a master bourbon taster and the only woman inducted into both the Bourbon and Whiskey Magazine Halls of Fame. Maggie Kimberl, a freelance spirits journalist, recently named Spirits Journalist of the Year by the Bourbon Women Association. And Susan Reigler, an award-winning author of 7 whiskey books and all-around expert on the bourbon industry, culture, and science. So what a trifecta of bourbon icons we have. We are so lucky and so grateful to have you here with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. So Peggy, you are up first. But before I hand it over to you to talk about the history of women in the bourbon industry, I want to wish you and the organization that you founded, the Bourbon Women Association, a very happy 15th anniversary. The impact the Bourbon Women Association has made on this industry cannot be quantified, but it is definitely significant. So thank you. Happy anniversary, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And what can I say? We are thrilled that this is our 15-year anniversary for the Bourbon Women Association. But women go way back further, over 200 years of being part of the industry. And whether it was working in the fields with corn, grains, et cetera, whether it was being in the bottling line, assisting, filling those bottles, or someone like Marge Samuels, for example, who designed the famed Maker's Mark iconic label. We were always part of the industry, but we were never told stories about that until probably over the last 15 years or so. And Maggie's even going to share some insight a little bit later on someone pretty special. But that leads me to why Bourbon Women Association was created. I'm sure that it is not a unique story to anyone listening today that whenever you gather a group of women who really have a passion for something and a cause, magical things happen. And that's really what happened with the Bourbon Women Association. Being a master taster, I traveled around the world for over 30 years, conducting all types of seminars and teaching people about our world famous product, because Kentucky's always had that pedigree. But what I noticed along the way when I was conducting these is that there were very few women in the audience. The consumer was not present as female. So lots of men in the room, usually 80, 90%. And even if there was a trickle of women, they would be very shy to raise their hand, ask a question, or sit toward the front of the room. And so I watched this being in marketing for years, marketing several brands that are very popular and global. And when I started my company 18 years ago, I decided that we needed to do something about it. We needed to reach out to our consumers and say, hey, women are the other half of the population, and we're missing a really economic value by not, conversing with them and selling to them through a unique platform. So I never expected, frankly, that this would grow outside of Kentucky. So what I did do when I started as the founder of the organization, we conducted focus groups across Kentucky. And we asked women, if we started an organization that celebrated not just the whiskey and bourbon side of things, but the lifestyle, the culture of Kentucky, would that be interesting to you? And it was a resounding yes. So all those facts, figures that we relied on when we heard in the focus group, I took it to one of my mentors, and one of the best marketers I know in the industry was Bill Samuels. And so I sat with Bill Samuels and said, look, we've got all this research that women want to be part of our bourbon franchise. How do we change this? Should we start an organization, et cetera? And he put it best. He said, Peggy, you're absolutely right. We need to start a conversation with women. He didn't say we need to market to them. He didn't said we need to cater to them. He said we need to start a conversation. So from there, I formed a board of women, and that's who I truly want to give credit to for this national brand now, known as Bourbon Women, because it's a board of volunteers. Two of the women are on with me today, Maggie and Susan, who made great leaps and bounds in growing the organization. But this small little Kentucky gathering that we did back in 2011 at the governor's mansion as our inaugural event of 75 people now has thousands of women across the US. We're in 16 cities formally. We also have a foundation that gives away, I think we've given away over 60 scholarships to women who want to break into the industry or be mentored in the industry. So it's been this really incredible culmination of gathering women, and it became more than the whiskey. It became a movement. It became a gathering place for women to have community. I think it became a place where women could be soulful, be seen, to have fun, because sometimes we forget to have fun in our busy lives. And so that's why I suggest that it has become a movement. I think that what we have to consider in the marketing of our brands and our products, especially being a master taster, is we have to give a platform, for women to gather and hear these events that we put on. So across the nation, we've probably conducted over 500 events that industry, master distillers, blenders, people that work in the actual industry have been able to talk to and educate the women. And so our whole foundation is born from being able to educate women on our spirits. I will also say what's so wonderful is we created the first annual event for women only in the spirits organization, and that is called the Symposium. And you heard me right, it's SIP, Symposium. So in Kentucky, again, another banner year for us, we'll have probably close to 500 women come into our great state to participate in behind the scenes workshops, excursions to distilleries. They'll hear keynote speakers, and Lieutenant Governor, I sure hope you're one of them this year to welcome this organization at the conference. It'll be held in Louisville in August. And this is where the women, if you know how busy women are, they carve out a Wednesday through Sunday, that whole period of time just to fly to Kentucky and hear about bourbon. That's pretty magical, right? So we hope we have a banner year with that. And if you're interested in joining the organization, finding out more about it, you just go to www.bourbonwomen.org. Or if you're interested in our foundation, you can visit our foundation website and support the future, of women. So that's really kind of a Cliff Note version over the last 15 years. But what we're seeing, and through the wonderful support of the Kentucky Distillers Association, national spirits organizations like Discus, they are really putting their arms around getting to know more of the women. And when I say consumer, don't forget that we also have so many industry partners who have become part of Bourbon Women because we deliver. The women are enthusiastic, they're curious about products, they want to hear, they want to buy. And so I think in the trends that Maggie's getting ready to go over, that is more important than ever, is to find new consumers to purchase our brands.
Wow, thank you so much, Peggy. That was like a treasure trove of information for everybody. Thank you. So it is obvious that there's a rich history in bourbon, and that women are a very significant part of it. And Peggy, thank you for helping to put Kentucky women, especially on center stage for that. But that helps us set the context for the next part of our conversation, which is where the industry is today with Maggie. And so, Maggie, we've heard a lot of news recently about distilleries closing or halting or slowing production. So my first question to you is it really as bad as it sounds? But before you dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm Maggie Kimberl. I am the content editor of American Whiskey Magazine and the chair of the World Whiskies Awards in the United States. And I contribute to many other publications. And I've worked with Peggy and Susan in the past in regards to Bourbon Women as well. And I've been doing this for over a decade. So there's some really interesting things going on right now. And we've heard a lot about Jim Beam shuttering its Claremont plant. Brown-Forman cut about 10% of its global staff, which included shuttering the Brown-Forman cooperage here in Louisville. Kieran just sold Four Roses to a California wine company, Gallo. Uncle Nearest is in receivership down in Tennessee. Garrett County Distillery is in receivership. Luca Mariano Distillery is in bankruptcy. Kentucky Owl, which is owned by Stoli, is in bankruptcy. And that seems like a lot of really bad news. But I was listening to the Discus annual economic briefing last week and got some really interesting data points out of that. So according to Discus, in 2024, there were approximately 3,100 DSPs nationwide. That number shrunk in 2025 to 2,300. That's a loss of about 25% of the country's DSPs in just 1 year. But to put that into a broader perspective, 20 years ago in 2006, there were about 80 DSPs in the entire United States. So the bourbon boom has increased the output of American whiskey pretty significantly over the last 20 years. Revenue decreased 2.2%, about 841 million between 2024 and 2025 across all spirits categories within the United States. But the volume of spirits increased 1.9%, 5.9 million cases. That is how much was sold. There are a lot of driving factors behind this. There's
Wait,
economic.
Maggie,
Yes,
real quickly, for all of us rookies that don't know as much as you know, can you tell everybody what a DSP means?
of course. A DSP is a distilled spirits plant. So these are places where American spirits, including things like vodka and brandy and things like that, are being actually produced. Or, in some cases, these are like tasting rooms or bottling facilities and things like that. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. I forget that not everybody knows the lingo. There are a lot of economic driving forces behind what's going on in the industry right now. So there's economic uncertainty. There's pretty significant inflation, decreasing international sales because of things like tariffs and trade wars. They're decimating small businesses. Overall, though, revenue in this industry is remaining pretty steady. Sales for 2025 were still $600 million higher than 2021. We experienced another kind of mini boom because of the pandemic, because people were getting more interested in what they were drinking and, spending a little bit more money than they would have otherwise on alcohol. All of this kind of points to a premiumization trend that we've been seeing for quite a few years, which means that basically people are still drinking, they're just reaching more for value brands. And that actually positions Kentucky really well because we have a wide breadth of high quality, economically favorable value brands of bourbon. So consumer sentiment has declined to historic lows. That is definitely impacting sales. Inflation is decreasing purchasing power. Hospitality is one area that has not seen the kind of recovery that we would have liked to see since the pandemic. It's been a lot slower than anticipated. But another interesting point is that ready-to-drink cocktails, these are pre-batched cans or bottles of things like an old fashioned that you can buy ready-made at the store and just pour over ice at your home, have surpassed vodka as the top seller in the spirits sector, growing 17% between 2024 and 2025. So overall, American whiskey has only gone down 1% in both sales and volume between 2024 and 2025.
Okay, so let me go back to something that you mentioned before, because you said you talked about tariffs. And so today is a landmark day. If for those of you who have not seen the news yet, the Supreme Court actually just struck down the tariffs that have been implemented by the Trump administration. It was in a 6-3 decision. So my first question to you is, this has been going on for a while. So how have tariffs impacted Kentucky and the bourbon industry, if they have? And I know this is fresh news, but how do you anticipate this decision from the Supreme Court impacting it as well?
So I'll answer the question about how this Supreme Court ruling is likely to impact the industry. And really the short answer is we don't know. Are they going to follow this ruling? Are they going to try to bring it back in another way? And really that all paints a picture of uncertainty. There's been a lot of uncertainty. It's very difficult to conduct any kind of business when you don't know how much like something like a glass bottle is going to cost you. If it comes in today, it costs this much, but if it comes in tomorrow, it costs 300% more. That's a very difficult environment in which to do business. So that remains to be seen. A shocking statistic from the Discus report was that distilled spirits exports to Canada dropped 73% year over year between March and October of 2025. That's 171 million to 47 million. That was one of our largest export markets, and they're not really showing any signs of letting up on that. There's been some kind of animosity toward doing business with American companies on the global stage, unfortunately. Beverage alcohol, like most industries, requires an international supply chain. We simply do not have the infrastructure here to be able to do absolutely everything on our own. So when we have climate disasters, we buy grains from other countries. We'll see things about like a hailstorm damaging corn crops. Glass bottles are manufactured all over the world. Corks primarily come from Portugal. Many distillers in the United States are owned by companies that are based in other countries. Jim Beam is owned by Suntory in Japan. Wild Turkey is owned by Campari in Italy. Bourbon is a distinct product of the United States, and this is one of the things that probably concerns me the most about the current trade wars and tariffs, is that bourbon was declared by a concurrent resolution in Congress in 1964 to be a distinct product of the United States. And what that means is nobody else around the world can make something and call it bourbon. The problem comes in where if we do not have a trade agreement in place with a certain country, they do not have to abide by American laws. So that's very concerning to me right now in this current economic climate. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Distilled spirits is an industry that's had to forecast 10, 20, 50, 100 years down the road, and being unable to forecast day to day because of potential tariffs makes it incredibly difficult to do business for all industries, including the Kentucky bourbon industry. But there is some good news, and I think Susan's going to talk a little bit more about this. The Kentucky Distillers Association also put out some figures about what's going on in the industry. And in its annual economic report between 2024 and 2025, the number of DSPs in Kentucky, those are those distilled spirits plants again, grew from 100 to 124 license holding locations. When you count bottlers and warehousing, that number climbs to 169. So that's a lot more jobs coming to Kentucky. This industry, like you mentioned before, is really one of our main economic drivers. Employment within the industry peaked in June of 2024, but the most recent numbers show that figure is only down about 100 jobs. And when I say only down 100 jobs, we need to understand like these are people's lives and livelihoods, and that's certainly not a happy statistic, but it's not as bad as it could be. Kentucky distilling has the second highest job multiplier in the state. Barrels filled has fallen slightly, but is still higher than the 2020 to 2022 era when that mini boom, that second mini bourbon boom, really was taking place. And probably one of the best, some of the best statistics that I've seen are that the Kentucky Bourbon Trail recently added 10 new destinations. So that's even more places for people to come to our Commonwealth and visit and enjoy our native spirit. And nearly 80% of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail visitors are from outside of the Commonwealth. So they are bringing significant money into our state visiting the Bourbon Trail. And finally, there were 2.7 million visitor experiences on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in 2024.
That's pretty amazing. And I can say that we have broken our tourism records year after year. And obviously that is in huge thanks to the bourbon industry. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you for helping us to understand where the industry is today. And so now we're going to turn to Susan, and she's going to tell us about the different ways that we can interact with bourbon aside from consuming it, right? So, Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. Pleasure to be here. Well, I do outrank Maggie in just a little bit in that I've been writing about bourbon for 34 years, which is remarkable to me. I did not think when I was 12 years old I would grow up to be a bourbon writer, but there it is. This is what's happened. And got the start on that when I was at the Courier Journal as the restaurant critic and beverage writer. And it was just at the time in the 1990s that people started paying attention to bourbon again after the industry had gone through quite a lull. So I was simply in the right place at the right time. Unbelievable to think that you could just on a Saturday afternoon walk onto the grounds of Woodford Reserve without anyone being around. And now on a Saturday afternoon, you have to book that ahead several months. So it's really been remarkable to see the growth in especially the tourism in the industry. And I think that's very right that both Peggy and Maggie have talked about how that's one of the economic drivers of people coming here to experience bourbon. I think you need to know that Peggy is one of the 3 women who were working at distilleries in the 90s who came up with the idea for the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So that's a very significant way in which women have had a very big impact on the industry. And you see them in every facet of the industry. You can even go back in history. The very first person to write down a recipe for the sour mash process was a woman named Catherine Carpenter of Casey County in 1818. We still have a physical copy of her recipe. So women have been doing this for a very long time. And I also have had the wonderful experience. For many years, I was a professor of biology at Indiana University Southeast, right across the river from Louisville. And I remember when talking about cell metabolism, and I would be talking about fermentation, I would always flash a picture of the Four Roses fermentation tanks up on the screen, and suddenly students were paying a lot more attention than they had been paying just a minute before. And I always told them that there are places for scientists in the bourbon industry, microbiologists, chemists, that the big legacy distillers all have very large research and development facilities. And about 8 years later, I was giving a talk on Whiskey Row, and a woman came up to me who probably in her early 30s, and she said, "Do you remember me? I was in your class. I now work in the laboratories at Jim Beam in Claremont." And I said, "That's pretty great." So the education of the workforce in the area. I also am an adjunct professor of beer, bourbon, and spirits for Eastern Kentucky University. And virtually all of the universities in the Commonwealth are doing bourbon programming to help train people for the workforce, whether it's the Jim Beam Institute at the University of Kentucky, the Tourism and Hospitality track at Eastern Kentucky University, which is what my course is a part of. I know that Kentucky State has some agricultural education for that, and the University of Louisville Business School has a specific track for bourbon and business. So there's certainly demand, obviously, for jobs in the industry, and I think the universities in Kentucky have stepped up to help educate the workforce for the next generation of people, and especially women. I mean, I noticed that so many of the faculty members at the Beam Institute and the other universities that are doing this, it's very women driven, and there are a lot of women taking these courses. So from everything from learning how to distill to the marketing to bourbon journalism, that's all happening through our universities, and that's pretty significant. And of course, with the tourism driving the jobs, that's we're preparing people to take those jobs, which is exactly what we need to do.
Well, Susan, that is so neat, and it makes me wonder if I can go back to college and take your class, maybe.
It's online, Lieutenant Governor. So, talk to the people at EKU and, sign up.
I know, right? That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much. Your remarks really helped us to realize how it's all connected, from education to science to agriculture, tourism, marketing, all of it. So thank you for putting those pieces together for us. So as we move out of this portion, we're going to allow our commissioners to ask some questions. And the first two are two that are connected to the bourbon industry in some way. And so I'm going to start with Susan Hirschberg because she has a question for you all. Susan?
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, and thank you to all the panelists. This has just been a wonderful reunion, really, of folks who many of us go way back. Peggy, I am just so enamored by your story, and you and I have done some really wonderful projects together. Susan Reigler, we also go way back. And Maggie, it's really great to meet you. I was involved with the first kind of cohort of folks who started to talk about bourbonism and how we could leverage the culinary community in Louisville and tie in with bourbon tourism, much in the same way that Napa Valley has connected the culinary excellence of California with the winemaking region. And so that was probably, 15 years ago that we had meetings upstairs at Wiltshire on Market in Nulu. I think it was still called the East Market Gallery District back then. It was before we called it Nulu. So we've definitely come a long way. And it's so exciting to see that even with the trends in the industry, the movement in Louisville is still very strong. We still see guests coming from all over the country when they're having an event here. They want to host their gathering at a distillery and do a bourbon tasting and do food and bourbon tastings, much like people do food and wine tastings. And so it's really been such an interesting journey and path to be a part of and to witness and to continue to study. It's really very impressive. And much like so many other stories, I think it's very classic that, there's this outside impression that the bourbon industry is a male-dominated industry. And when we look closer, we really don't have to look very close to see that is, it's a myth. It's an absolute myth. Women have been involved from the very beginning, and not just production and marketing, but the growth of the industry. And so that leads me to Maggie. Maggie, I know you share some of my same sentiments about this notion of bourbon being a male-dominated industry. And many of us recognize the name Henry McKenna, but we might not be familiar with some other McKenna stories. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your recent article and discoveries.
Well, thank you for asking about this, because as you said, I kind of wince a little bit when people say this is a male-dominated industry. I think that's it's been marketed that way, certainly, and that is not the reality. So recently I published a story about Marcella McKenna, and I had been researching this story for probably about 6 years. I was researching a completely different story about 6 years ago and came across these two sentences in a sesquicentennial history of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And it said, Miss Marcella McKenna took an active part in the operations of the McKenna Distillery from 1933 until the plant was sold in 1941. Since that time, she has been associated in the radio industry. And I became obsessed with that. Our good friend Fred Minnick wrote Whiskey Women. Gosh, what was that, like 15 years ago, 16, 17 years?
Actually, Maggie, it really was 15 years ago when he was at the governor's mansion at the inaugural event for Bourbon Women. And when we talked about women being part of the industry for 200 years, he didn't believe us as a journalist.
Yep.
And so he went to go research, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's just funny because he ended up writing a book about it.
Well, I'm glad you threw that in there, because I was going to say, Peggy told Fred, like, hey, did you know women were involved? And he was like, nuh-uh, and went and actually wrote a whole book about it. But I found this, these two sentences about Marcella McKenna. And of course, like Susan said, we've all heard of Henry McKenna. It's a great bourbon brand owned today by Heaven Hill. And the reality is that Marcella McKenna actually ran the family business before, during, and after Prohibition. So I found her family archives in the library at the University of Kentucky. I ordered all 4 reels. I went through 9,000 pages of her archives to get kind of a picture of what she was doing. And she was really running the show. And what was even more interesting than that was that her mother was also involved in running the business, as was, I believe, her sister. So these were women who had this great family business, and they were very involved in running it, day-to-day operations. I found letters to cork suppliers. I found letters to the federal government, letters from Marcella to shareholders, and it really just painted a picture of how involved she actually was. This wasn't like, oh, she was the spokesgirl, or something that, or she worked on the bottling line. She was actually running the family business. And so it took me a long time to be able to publish that story, because I couldn't find any additional, I could never find a photograph of her, or any additional supporting documentation outside of those archives. And within 10 minutes of posting that on LinkedIn, after that story went live, I found out that another person that I've known for over a decade in the industry, Doug Craigle out at Stitzel Weller, married into that family, and his wife Marcy is named after her dad's aunt Marcella. So I love how those stories come full circle. So more to come on that.
That's great, Maggie. What a commitment to telling the story. That's great. So thank you all for chiming in on that too. So now another commissioner who has some experience in the bourbon industry is Emma Hutchins, and I believe she has a couple of questions for you all. So Emma, take it away.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and thanks to our panelists. It's been so much fun to hear your thoughts on this conversation. And I've been really fortunate to spend much of my career in the spirits space. First at Brown-Forman, most recently at Heaven Hill. Of course, hearing about Henry McKenna and everything you just shared, Maggie. I was really grateful to be at Heaven Hill when we transitioned to third generation leadership. It's family owned and operated. And the co-presidents there now are Kate Latz and Alan Latz. And so kind of on that topic, my first question for all of our panelists, anyone who wants to have an opinion on this and share it, is that bourbon has evolved culturally for women, right? We've been talking about that. But I'm curious, in your perspective, has power actually shifted, right? So when we think about where are women gaining real influence, ownership, capital allocation, blending decisions, and where is that still lagging?
Sure. And you're talking in the industry, not consumer. Okay,
Yeah.
because there's power on both sides, if you will. I have, again, I've been in the industry over 30 years, and I worked for Brown-Forman for 17 years of that. So I do know and remember, what it was like in the late 80s, early 90s. And believe it or not, they're, part-time, and this is no effect of Brown-Forman, because it was all like this. There was no part-time jobs. That was unheard of at the time. And most of the really great marketing positions or production related was, of course, male driven. Over the course of time, though, and bringing that to present day, I am very happy to say that we have seen a real onset of women who are master blenders, master distillers, working in production in very prominent roles like Elizabeth McCall. I will also say in the marketing side of things, we have seen quite a boost in marketing directors. I think of Gigi Dadan as general manager of Angel's Envy, and now she is the chair of the Kentucky Distillers Association, which I think maybe have only had 3 or 4 women, as chairperson. So I have definitely seen a different direction, because I think what we've learned in our industry is you have to create a roadmap for women. It's not, as Susan put it so nicely, it's not like she was 12 years old and decided to be a whiskey writer. Something led her to it. And so the more that I think the industry has embraced women and have given a training roadmap to get into different areas of the industry has been very helpful. I truly credit the University of Kentucky, James B. Distilling Institute, for creating programmatic content and degrees that women can take part of. So that leads me, that was the good news. That leads me to where I think we're lacking. I think on the distributor level, you do not see women in high positions. And I also think on the C-suite level, it's harder and harder to find the CEOs out there unless it's a craft distillery. So I think we have some homework and a little bit more work to do in general, to raise the perception of true leadership roles in that regard. But I think we are pointed in the right direction. Susan, Maggie, would you like to?
Well, I would like to add to that. I've said this before on numerous occasions, on the record, on camera. Peggy, in a lot of respects, shattered the glass ceiling and threw down the rope ladder for the rest of us. But we're not done yet. There's still a lot of areas of the industry where women have not yet ventured or had the opportunity to venture. Probably one of the best stories that I can give you as an example of where a woman has succeeded is out at Potter Jane Distillery. My friend Jane Bowie from formerly of Maker's Mark, and Denny Potter, her partner, who was also the master distiller at Maker's Mark, have started their own distillery. And so that is really a major Kentucky distillery that is now woman owned. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And we're going to have to continue to shatter a lot of glass for the next generation. But we're getting there slowly but surely.
Yeah, and I would say again, there's so many women that are behind the scenes. It strikes me, I actually write for American Whiskey Magazine, so that Maggie is one of my bosses. I have a lot of bosses, but when I do stories, when I do articles, for instance, I did one on the Jim Beam Distillery research and their research facility, and April Easton is their head of research and innovation, whiskey research and innovation, and of her team of 4 people, 3 are women. So you have that going on. That it's just more and more and more. If you look at the Whiskey Row experiences in downtown Louisville, you see a lot of women when you are going to those places who are the managers of the facilities, who are tour guides, who are actually pretty heavily involved. You get a lot of women in the industry, such as Andrea Wilson, who is a former Kentucky Distillers Association head, and she is the master of maturation for Michter's, which means she's in charge of all the barrels and of also saying, when is this bourbon ready? That she and the master distiller will get together and confer on that. So everywhere in the industry, there are women, and I think I agree about we could use some more women who are the owners, but I suspect that's coming. So
Susan, do you mind if I add one more thing
sure, go ahead.
to what you're saying? Because I want to bring full circle back to the Bourbon Women Foundation. Those 60 scholarships, over
Yeah.
60 scholarships that we have given the women who have participated in the program, which is a year-long program of mentorship, training, et cetera, have gone on to, some of them, to start their own innovations, if you will, whether it's whiskey or it's a business in the industry. And it's important to know that. I think of Brittany Penny, Maggie,
Absolutely.
who was
yeah.
a SIP scholar, who's now has her own whiskey brand. That's one example, and I have many. But what I think is so important for women is we have to develop and plant the seeds
Mhm.
for them to learn and to have the courage to go to the next thing. Because otherwise, you're always looking in a rearview mirror thinking, well, what could I have done?
Mhm.
We need to put a front mirror to say, here's where you're going.
Yeah. What is possible?
What is
Make everybody
possible?
know what is possible.
That's
Absolutely.
correct.
I love that. That's a really good analogy and incredible work that's being done and impact that's being had. So thanks for continuing to champion that work. My
Thank
second
you.
question is
Emma, can I interrupt you for one quick? I'm sorry to do this. I'm popping in, but we had a great question that I think dovetails into this that I wanted to ask that came through the chat. So we have a commissioner from Western Kentucky, Christy Guffey. Her question is this: the grain industry is a cornerstone of bourbon production. By sourcing Kentucky grown corn, wheat, and rye, distilleries reinvest directly into local growers and fortify the Commonwealth's economy. This is vital for Kentucky farmers in today's times. Are you seeing any female producers supplying grains to the distilleries?
Absolutely. I mean, top of the list there is Brooks Grain.
Yeah, that's exactly
That's
who I
It's
think
a
about.
women-owned
that's
company. Yeah.
woman-owned company,
Global
very
company.
global company, active in the Bourbon Women Association. They're one of the major players in grain brokerage, but in the grain brokerage business. Absolutely.
Around the world, and they're headquartered here in Louisville.
Yep.
Yeah, and another couple women who are sisters called Whiskey Sisters. I mean, they are not from Kentucky, but they are a grain company, but they also do a lot of work. I know they've worked with folks like Maker's Mark for regenerative farming,
Yep.
because they're helping us, and vice versa. So I think there's a lot of activity of women getting into the agricultural side.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, I'll ask my last question here. I think so often in the bourbon industry, I've been in the space for about 20 years, and we talk about the heritage and the legacy of our great brands, right? But we don't really spend as much time talking about the future. So I'm curious to hear from you on your thoughts about the future of bourbon, and really specifically, what do you think is the next frontier where women will lead the charge in the space?
I think we're going to see a lot more female master distillers. Honestly, we've had our first female master distiller, Marianne Eves, and that's in Kentucky, followed very quickly by Pam Heilman. And now I think it's becoming more common to have women who are taking on that head role as the head distiller, master distiller, whatever they want to call it. Sherry Moore, who is basically Tennessee whiskey royalty, is now out at Castle and Key, running the show out there. So we're seeing a lot more of that, and I expect to see even more in the near future.
I think that the future for women is in innovation.
Mm.
I think back to, again, the early 1990s when there were only 7 distilleries. And the golden rule legally was you could only buy 3 bottles per person per day, at a distillery. And and it was the easy choice because there was only one thing on the shelf normally of bourbon. Now you see all the bourbon finishes. Maggie mentioned the RTDs, and barrels are just incredible what you can do with innovation and barrel flavors. So I think there's going to be more women who develop because of our great olfactory senses and palates that are going to create new brands, new products. And also, I'll go so far to say it doesn't have to necessarily be at a distillery. I think we're going to see spin-off companies through mixologists, through culinary, and capitalizing on our pedigree here in Kentucky, but changing things in a different way. I've always really prided myself on trying to look down the road strategically of what's next, what's happening. I think there's a huge frontier still in tourism, which I hope to share some good news in the next 6 months about that. But I think tourism, there's a lot of innovation in tourism because the consumer doesn't know sometimes, especially tourists, what they want until you show them what they can have. And so instead of doing dinner and a movie, as a tourism experience, experiential is king or queen, as we say. And we live in an experience economy. I just saw a recent article, USA Today, not too long ago, that, Americans are willing to save money at the grocery store and cut back on their Starbucks coffee, but they're not willing to give up travel because that is sacred to them. So I think you're going to see an explosion as a spinoff in the industry through hospitality and tourism.
Mhm. And you have more and more of the distilleries coming up with the experiences that Peggy's talking about. We are way beyond the go to the distillery and see how bourbon is made.
Correct.
If you could go
Absolutely.
someplace like Maker's Mark and plant an oak tree, or
Right.
help with the sorghum harvest, or one of my favorites is, harvest a truffle and shave it into your cocktail. There are all kinds of experiences out there, or just go out and enjoy their beautiful grounds and hike the grounds. They have nature trails. And of course, they're kind of a modern art museum too. And I think you're going to see more and more of that happening with more distilleries, especially when Buffalo Trace has beautiful grounds as well. They offer a garden tour. So there's going to be more experiences for more people.
Well, thank you all so much. So the last question's for me. And it's based on a little fun fact that I heard. So I hope one of you can help explain it. But I heard that Kentucky has 2 time zones because of bourbon. Can anybody expound on that?
I believe that came from me.
Okay.
And what I've always been told, and I've heard this from enough people that I consider it to be reputable. Basically, the reason that Louisville is in the New York time zone is because we had a lot of our distillery business had satellite offices in New York, and they wanted to be in the same time zone as those New York offices.
That's actually not the story that I know, which is
Okay.
It does have to do with New York. It is when General Electric put their giant their appliance plant in Louisville. General Electric, which was headquartered in Schenectady, New York, wanted Louisville to be in the same time zone. And when I was little, and when I was a toddler, Louisville was on Central Time.
Wow.
And when General Electric came here, that it switched to Eastern Time.
That's amazing.
Don't mean to pop your balloon there, Maggie, but I think that's
Well,
actually
I mean,
story.
either way,
Hey.
somebody was lobbying for that.
Well,
Absolutely.
or can we just say, in true tradition of bourbon, folklore has it?
That's it.
If that's what we like to say.
Yeah. So there are a ton of wonderful stories in the bourbon industry, and some of them are actually true. So
I love that. Well, thank you all so much. I have to say that after today, my favorite thing about the bourbon industry is you three. Thank you for telling the stories. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you for keeping all of this going. Something that is uniquely Kentucky. So I'm so grateful for your all's time today, for your commitment, for your expertise. Thank you again for being with us today. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch. We encourage you to follow the Kentucky Commission on Women on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to keep up with our upcoming events and activities. And I hope that you will join us for our next conversation with commissioners in June. Maggie, Susan, Peggy.